There we go.
All right.
Okay, we are indeed live. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm just getting my lighting right because I got to get nice and beautiful.
Yeah, man, we
My,
gotta.
my office is turning into like
Yeah, I have
a
bought so many of
entertainment
those
studio.
different little like lights, and I've got another one on the way now. That's going to solve everything. But I I've bought like four or five of them, man. It's not easy to create like useful lighting or good lighting
Uh,
when it comes to these things.
well, listen, I think you've been struggling the most with this whole thing, right? I mean, how many lighting websites have you visited since the start of this thing?
I have visited a few, to be sure. No question about it. Um, whoops. I'll just mute that. All right, cool. So today we are going to play our little game. Play a little game. We're going to play yes, no, maybe. And for those people who don't know what that is, what we're going to do is we're going to bring up different topics from the health and wellness, from health and wellness in general. They don't necessarily have to specifically do with exercise or nutrition. They can be any concept that relates to health and wellness. And then we're going to give our opinion on each of those topics or concepts of yes, which is this is something that's valid, is something that should be done or should be at least considered. No, this is stupid. There's no science behind it. You're wasting your time, whatever our position is on that. The no is like, don't do this. And then
Right.
maybe is, you know, there might be applications for some people, maybe not, or just don't know yet. So that's the concept of this. Any intro words for you?
I mean, listen, I love doing this. I get to about like question 6 or 7, and then I turn into a 12-year-old child, and I start thinking about different things to ask you that I just want to put you on the spot with. So, but I'm going to do my best to keep ourselves in the realm of health and fitness today.
Okay, let's try to stay. We'll try to keep the train on the tracks. We'll see. All
Yeah.
right, I'm going to lob you a fairly simple one right off the bat. Okay,
All right.
fairly simple, right? Just to kick things off. People should drink a gallon of water a day. Yes, no, maybe.
It's a maybe for me. And I'll tell you, the maybe really has to do with the person to person. I think the way I would probably rephrase that so that it's a yes. Should people drink water continuously throughout the day, on the hour, every hour? Yes, absolutely. But should it be like a standard gallon? I don't know. I mean, like, if you're 200 pounds versus 115 pounds, should we both be drinking the same gallon of water? So that's the only stipulation that I would probably put down. It's a hard yes when it comes to continuous 6 to 8 ounces of water throughout the day, every waking hour of the day, starting to reduce the amount of water, of course, towards the end of the night for our over 30 crowd, because
I hope it's a little bit more than over 30. I mean, when I was
I mean,
35,
I mean,
when I was 35, I wasn't getting up 6 times a night to pee, but I'll tell you, it's a little bit different at 50.
yeah. So that's the only stipulation that I would probably do as far as like what amount it was. But listen, water has been one of those things that hold on, wait a second, is surprisingly simple when you think about solutions for health and wellness. Everybody's always kind of surprised as to if you were to kind of give one piece of advice for somebody that is trying to get healthy, it would be drinking water. I mean, it's really as simple as that, and it's really remarkable how many benefits water can have, just when you're trying to achieve health and wellness. Even weight loss. Like when I was really heavy into competitive fighting, when I got into that world, I was always surprised about the amount of weight a fighter would have to drop prior to a fight, and then they would regain it back, and they would constantly do this throughout the year. And started to ask fighters, what's your trick? Is there some sort of special trick that you do in order to drop so much weight so drastically right before a fight? And the answer was drinking gallons of water. Now, I think that that's the extreme version of that, but it was surprising to me that it was just as simple as that. You know, it was just like, you drink lots of water. You know, 5 days before, they're drinking like 2 gallons of water, which is excessive. I wouldn't recommend that for anybody. But it was remarkable to kind of hear that from that, because this whole time I was thinking, like, there's got to be some sort of special like diet that you go on, or some sort of special trick that you do in order to drop that much weight. And it really wasn't. I mean, it was just water.
Yeah. So for me, my answer is no, but I'm very much in alignment with what you're saying. The reason I say no to that is that I hate these hard, fast rules that people come up with. Like, you should drink a gallon of water a day. You should take in 1,200 calories a day. You need 9 servings of vegetables per day. Those sorts of concrete, hard, fast rules I don't like, because they disallow for individuality. But in principle, I agree with you. So does everyone need to drink a gallon of water a day? No. Can you? Sure. Is it going to hurt you? Probably not. Will it benefit you? I mean, more than 3/4 of a gallon? I don't know that there are any real benefits beyond what your minimum needs are. But, you know, the range is all across the map. So if you look it up, you're going to find all of these different ideas, because we don't really know how much water we should be eating per day. So it ranges from like 2.3 liters up to 3.7 liters, which is about a gallon. But one caveat to that is, so it's, you know, men are at the higher range typically because of their larger body mass and so on and so forth. But even when the recommendation is 3.7 liters of water, which is a gallon roughly, the caveat to that is that about 80% of that can be actual water that you drink. And the other 20% of that water generally comes from other fluids that you take in and the food that you eat. So it is not accurate to say that tea and coffee don't count toward your daily hydration. They've kind of debunked that. So even fruit juices, even things that have small amounts of caffeine in them, like coffee and tea, they count toward your daily consumption of water.
Really? So the whole concept of it being a diuretic to a certain extent.
So yes, it's a diuretic, but to the extent that it depletes so in other words, does a cup of coffee, 8 ounces of coffee, which is 8 ounces of liquid, right? So a cup of coffee is 8 ounces of water with black coffee in it. Does the amount of caffeine that's in there that has diuretic effects negate the value of the entire 8 ounces? No. So the current mode of thinking is that all liquids contribute to the total overall amount of water that you take in per day. And the other thing to calculate is, if you are largely plant focused in how you eat, about 20% of the water that we get on a daily basis comes from our food, from fruits and vegetables. Because if you think about it, and you're cutting up fruit or vegetables, you're going to make an omelet or something, you're cutting up veggies, there's a lot of water in those veggies that you're cutting up. And historically speaking, you know, people who ate a high volume of produce didn't have to drink as much water. So about 20% of the total water that we take in comes from fruits and vegetables, which again is another reason why not to follow the standard American diet, because the standard American diet is largely made up of processed foods and a high volume of animal products, none of which have any sort of
large amounts of water in it.
Yeah.
So here, let me play devil's advocate for you, because I think people hear that, and some people, I don't want people to take it to an extreme, because I can almost hear the graveyard shifter that has been living on a pot, 3 pots of coffee every single day, will sit there and be like, well, if 96 ounces of water or a gallon of water is my recommended daily. Well, I've got a half a gallon of coffee in me. All I need is another half a gallon of water. I'm good. Or take it to the extreme. What about a gallon of
Yeah.
coffee?
So my understanding of the rule is 80% of your total intake should be water, straight water. And then the other 20% can be made up of fruits, vegetables, and additional liquids. So the dude that's taken down 3 pots of water of coffee would need to be taking down, 12
One.
pots of water
Yeah.
to balance that 80-20. So I guess it's kind of like the Pareto principle, right? It's the 80-20 rule. 80% needs to be actual water.
Got it. Got it. I wanted to clarify that because I can almost hear some people going, hey.
Yeah.
It's just
And
water.
listen, there are some people, we have some members who have said, I don't drink a single glass of water a day. They get all of their liquid from tea and coffee and whatever else. That is not, I think it's safe to say that is not healthy.
No. I mean, like I always fear, like I immediately go, my kidneys ache when I hear stuff like, I'm like, oh, here, have a glass of water, please.
You can tell. I mean, your body feels like 10 miles of shit when you don't drink water. I don't know how somebody can go through the day without drinking any water and kind of making up the overall consumption of their liquids from coffee. Now, I will say that it's 12 o'clock and I'm having a cup of coffee right now, but I've also had quite a bit of water. All right, so that's good. Water, check. You say maybe, I say no, only because I don't like the hard, fast rule of you should drink this. You should drink this amount exactly. You got one for me?
I do. I have several. Well, let's stick with the hard, fast stuff.
Let's go back and forth.
Is breakfast the most important part of the day? Is it the most important meal of the day, I should say?
Okay, so maybe. And the reason I say that is that one of the older ideas was that skipping breakfast would result in a higher intake of calories for the rest of the day because you would get voraciously hungry and then you would overcompensate for that missed meal with a larger amount of calories. And I think that rule has been pretty much debunked in research. So if we're talking about is breakfast the most important meal of the day from a weight loss perspective, the answer is not necessarily, because you don't necessarily overcompensate with a higher number of calories throughout the day if you skip breakfast. Yes, it's the most important meal of the day because break fast is the first meal that you have on any day. And it doesn't matter if it's at 6 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock at night, breaking your fast is breakfast. So we tend to think about breakfast as being a morning time, morning meal. But yes, it's important from my perspective in that you want to set the tone for the rest of the day nutritionally with that first meal. So when you're coming out of your fast, which everybody's coming out of a fast in the morning, whether they've slept 6 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours, whether they had their last meal 15 hours previous or 5 hours previous, their first meal of the day, they're breaking fast. I think it's important to set a standard for the rest of the day by getting in a highly nutritious meal right off the bat. Because number one, it just kind of sets the stage for the rest of the day, and the rest of the day can get away from you. And you can be on the run and you can be grabbing things that are convenient but unhealthy. And so for me, this is just an opinion and there's no scientific basis for this. I start my day with the most nutritious meal. I cut up 5 to 6 different types of vegetables. I saute them very lightly in avocado oil or grass-fed ghee. I add them to a little bit of egg whites and 2 whole grass-fed eggs, and I eat that along with a piece of fruit. What that means is that I'm getting 5 to 6, I'm usually getting 2 to 3 cups of vegetables and fruit right off the bat, right out of the gate, first thing in the day. And I don't eat my breakfast usually until later in the morning, but it's my first meal. And whole eggs. There's a lot of good stuff in the yolk of a grass-fed egg. So I do think that's important as well. So that's kind of where I would fall on that. Maybe it's the most important meal of the day, but there's not a lot of science that shows that from a weight loss perspective, it's critically important.
Yeah, see, I think for me, and this is also, there's no science and research basis on this, is just my opinion. I think it's, like you said, it sets a tone. It's more behavioral in there's more of an impact on my daily behavior if I have my first meal be a very nutritious, well-balanced meal. It kind of sets the tone. So for me personally, breakfast or breaking fast, because I usually do it with like a protein shake, and I put in some veggies and different things like that, and some flaxseed. That is the most important because it helps set the tone. Just so it's kind of like what you were saying, is just setting the tone. So whether it has an impact on weight loss directly or indirectly, for me, it's more of a behavioral thing for me when it comes to the importance that I place on my first meal of the day.
I totally agree with that, because I feel like when and I do this, I'm a creature of habit. And so my first 2 meals of the day, 98% of the time are the same. It's, eggs and veggies. I vary the veggies. So they're not always the same veggies, because I want to expose my body to a wide spectrum of different vegetables. So they're not always the same. But from a nutrition perspective and a nutrient density perspective, I agree with you. I think the first meal of the day is important to make sure right off the bat, you've got 12 to 16 hours of battle that you've got to go into, right, in the course of a day. And I think that you need to make sure that you're starting that battle with as much nutrition, not calories, but nutrition as you can. And so that's why when I start the day with 2 to 3 cups of diced up vegetables and a piece of fruit, I feel like I'm crushing it as far as providing my body with the materials that it needs to function optimally. One thing I will add to that too is that on the side of intermittent fasting, I think we talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago. There are differences in the studies that they've done with regard to intermittent fasting on rats versus humans. So the studies that they've shown on that are animal studies that are conducted on rats have shown that skipping breakfast is more beneficial. But when they do studies with humans, the opposite is true. They find that skipping dinner is more beneficial than skipping breakfast. And when they thought about it, it makes sense, because rats are nocturnal. They're much more likely to be active late at night and to want to feed themselves into the night and then not feed themselves in the morning when they're sleeping. Humans are not. So we would want to be feeding ourselves throughout the course of the daylight hours as much as possible, and then fasting as much during the dark hours of the day, and then making sure that we don't skip breakfast. So that's just a little aside as far as whether breakfast is the most important meal of the day. If you're intermittent fasting, there seems to be some evidence that shows that in human studies, skipping breakfast is not as beneficial for the benefits of intermittent fasting as skipping dinner is.
That's interesting.
All right.
Come to that conclusion?
Go ahead.
Did they come to that conclusion after the fact?
Came to that conclusion. Yeah, they were noticing that there weren't a lot of benefits in human studies. So they were getting, the problem with animal models, besides the ethical piece of it, which I struggle with, but is that they don't always translate to being relevant in humans. And so they were showing some benefit in intermittent fasting in animal models, rodent models. But there weren't a ton of human studies. So first of all, they're like, well, okay, this is showing some benefit when it comes to rodent studies, but does it translate to humans? We don't know. And then they did some studies with humans, and they found that, number one, there isn't a ton of biological benefit that they can see as far as observable and quantifiable metrics. But what metrics they were able to observe fell on the side of making sure that humans don't skip breakfast. It's more beneficial to skip dinner.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, staying on the topic of nutrition.
Okay.
Is there a perfect human diet?
Is there a perfect human diet? I don't believe that there's a perfect anything. I mean,
so think about that. Like there's all this debate that always goes on. There's keto and there's paleo and there's veganism and there's vegetarian and there's omnivorous and Mediterranean and pescatarian, and there are all these things. And so many of these advocates of their particular style of eating are religious in their support of their methodology. My way is the best way. Is there, based upon science, do you feel that there is an ideal or a perfect human diet?
No, I don't. Listen, that's a hard no for me too, because so much of, and I've seen it so much in people that I've worked with, I've seen it even in myself. My own nutrition has evolved and continues to evolve. And I don't think that you can ever just place a pin on it and just say, that's it. Because we change. I mean, listen, I'm 40 years old, and you could probably attest to this. My body's changed since I was in my 20s, or since I was in my 30s, and it's going to continually change. It's going to change when I get into my 50s. To sit there and say that I can eat the same nutritious meal plan the same way I ate it in my 20s is silly. It's impossible. So, is there a perfect way of eating that you can just kind of go, that's it, that's the way to do it, I'm going to do that for life? I don't see that being the case. I don't even see that being the case in anything, even outside of nutrition. I think it's always evolving. I think you're always kind of adapting. New things come about. And you have to be able to be in tune with your own health enough to notice those changes in your own body so that you can make the right pivot when you need to pivot, right? There was a time I remember when I was taking in a really high fat diet. I was taking in coconut oil. I was taking in avocados. Everything was all about fat. And I got really, really lean. My body responded very well to that type of diet. Now, I was in my mid to late 20s at the time. And I tried to do that in my mid 30s again, and it didn't have the same effect. What changed? So for me personally, I've experienced that you just have to kind of adapt to where you're at in your life and where your health is at in that period of time, and find the right nutritious meal that can help supplement or support that. And there are, on the other side of it, there are more ideal diets that are sounded in science than others, of course, intermittent fasting being one of them. But I wouldn't call intermittent fasting perfect. There are some flaws behind that. But if there was going to be one that was most ideal, it would be a form of intermittent fasting. So I would have to say no as far as it being perfect. I hate that word. Anytime I hear, I'm like, ooh, that's dangerous, because it's it's a place of, like, how do you grow when you're like,
it's absolutism. It's absolutism.
Yeah.
Anytime you hear ideal, perfect, or best, there's an immediate red flag that goes up. And I agree with you. I think that there are certain. Now, first of all, I will say that I've read a lot of different science on a lot of different nutrition concepts and methodology, and everybody's got their story, and a lot of these people have a lot of science to back it up. And the problem with science is that it's not perfect, and that you can prove a flat earth theory if you want to try hard enough, you know?
Yeah.
But there are certain, I think, tenets of nutrition that are fairly true across the board. For example, plant-focused eating is going to expose your body to the widest variety of nutrients. Plant-focused. When I say plant-focused, I don't mean plants only. I mean making plants the focal point of your eating, and then if you happen to eat animal products, making that a smaller part of your eating. So 75% plants, 25% the rest of it, just as kind of a rough approximation. So there are certain kind of tenets that I think are very valid scientifically across the board. Focus on plants, nutrient density, so a wide variety and a wide spectrum of plants. If you're going to eat animal products, eat cold water fish, eat the organ meats, eat grass-fed and pasture-raised animals. These are kind of concepts that I think are valid across the board, but I don't think you can construct a perfect or an ideal human diet. And in part because there are genetics involved, there's bio-individuality involved. You and I do not have the same biological, exactly the same genetic and biological makeup. You may have things that aggravate your gut that I can eat. I may have things that aggravate my gut that you can't eat. I do feel that in general, and I'm always reluctant to say this, I do feel in general, based upon the science, that an omnivorous diet exposes you to the greatest likelihood of getting all of the nutrients you need. And if you are on a plants-only diet, I think that you run the risk of nutrient deficiencies. And I think there's a fair amount of science that shows that. Now, I will also say this while saying, I do not myself eat animals. I do eat cold water fish, but I don't eat animals. So I'm not advocating for an omnivorous diet because it happens to be the diet that I follow. Right. I'm pescatarian, and I'm making that choice to be pescatarian, even though that I know that I feel like it would be a healthier choice from a nutrient density perspective for me to include organ meats in my eating. But I choose not to do that because ethically, that doesn't feel right to me. So that's my perspective on the perfect human diet. There is no perfect human diet. There's bio-individuality, genetics play a part, and so does evolution. So if we take a look at, 50,000 years ago, when you had tribes of people living on all of the continents in different places across the world, those tribes would have been exposed to different foods depending upon what was available in their environment. So if you lived on a South Pacific island, like the Catawbans, you would have eaten coconuts, fish, and not a lot of other foods because there wasn't much else available. And maybe generation after generation after generation, your body biologically and genetically adapted to favor those foods. And if you lived in the Arctic, you would have had different foods available to you. If you lived on the Kalahari, you would have different foods available to you. So depending to some degree on your genetic lineage, that might also play a role. And I don't know that it does, but that might also play a role in what sorts of foods are more beneficial to you on a nutrient level, just because historically that's part of your genetics.
All right. Well, with that said, I actually just came up with a question for you.
Okay.
Can you change or alter your genetic lineage based upon the choices that you make right now?
Yes, that's called epigenetics. So in other words, your behavior right now is impacting your downline 3 to 4 generations. So how you're living your life right now and your biology is going to impact your kids and your kids' kids and their kids' kids. And the research shows that epigenetics is, if I'm correct, now let me qualify this.
Prior to them being born?
Prior to them being born.
So what you're talking about is I'm altering my my DNA essentially.
Well, you're playing a role in your children's DNA based upon how you live your life. So if you live your life with nothing but a standard American diet, eating nothing but processed foods, not eating a lot of produce, not exercising, smoking and drinking, you're passing on less healthy DNA to your children. And if your children, based upon their observation of your behavior, continue that behavior of drinking and smoking and not eating well and not exercising, so you're passing on degraded genetics, generation after generation after generation.
And
However,
then solidifying it with behaviors that they observe once they're born.
right. However, the opposite is true as well. So if you are a very healthy person in your behaviors and you are impacting your genetics. So epigenetics is basically your genetics. All of your genes aren't necessarily going to be expressed or turned on. You might carry the gene for something, but it might not be triggered unless there is an environmental interaction or a behavioral interaction. So you might not be triggering certain genetic issues that you have because your behavior or the environment that you live in isn't triggering those genetics. By the same token, the way that you live and your behaviors can activate some positive genetic factors. So the way that we live is going to impact our genetics, and then we're going to pass on those genetics to the next generation and on and on and on. So I have said many times that I have benefited from how my parents modeled behavior to me. And Stacy, who's watching right now, Stacy Funk and I have talked about this a number of times, because sometimes I get a little pissy when people see my parents and they say, now I know why you're thin. You've got good genetics. And I'm like, no, I've got good parents. Okay. I had parents that made me eat my vegetables and exercise and live a healthy lifestyle. And that's why I'm fit and healthy and so on and so forth. And yes, that's true to a large extent because my parents have modeled healthy behavior to me. But I also benefit from the epigenetic transfer that they gave to me by being healthy people for their whole lives, and that gets passed on generation to generation. So what we're seeing now is we're going to see a continual degradation of genetic health, generation after generation after generation, if people continue to live the standard American lifestyle of shitty food, no exercise, poor social interaction, no sleep, too much stress. They're just going to pass poor genetics on to their children, and their children, if they model that behavior, are going to continue to pass it on. So,
listen, that's part of the reason from last week's discussion why this period of time is so scary to me, is for that. It's like, look at the atmosphere that we're in. No social. So
your behavior will impact the expression of your genes.
Right.
All right. Wait. You asked me a question.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to ask you a question. This is a two-part question. Okay, and this is health and wellness related. If you're a personal trainer and you're applying for a job, is the best way to demonstrate your qualifications to just lift your shirt up and show your abs and say, this is what I'm bringing to the table?
Oh my God, dude. That guy was amazing, wasn't he? I mean, he set the bar high.
So that actually happened to Joe and me. A trainer came in to apply for a job, and when Joe was asking him questions about his background and anything, he basically just went, hey, hang on a second. Lifted his shirt up, showed his abs, and said, this is what I'm bringing to the table. Like, this is my resume.
And I think I recall us taking a look at, I looked at you and you looked at me.
Well, I was stunned. I didn't know how to respond to that.
Yeah. First of all, all right, I got, is the second part to it is your ability to sing the theme song to Cheers.
Yes, that is the second part. That is so good. I'm so glad you remember that. Yes. So the second part of that question is another optimal way to apply for a job as a personal trainer, to show up, first of all, smelling like whiskey, and then singing the theme song to Cheers.
Oh,
because that was one of the single most awkward moments of my life. And in part, because I was in the office with her, right? And we're talking, and she said, I just really love the community that you've created here. Like where everybody knows you. And I'm like, yeah, that you're right. And then and she kept going. And I'm like,
wait for the second verse.
Yeah, she launched into another verse. I'm like, I didn't know this song had like another verse. And I sat there getting more and more. So I wanted to run from the room, because I think at some point she forgot that I was actually sitting there, and she was still hammered from the night before. And she was actually thought that she was auditioning for, The Voice or something like that.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
yes.
What's funny about that is I think that you came out of that interview and made it a policy that I take over the hiring after that.
Yeah, absolutely. That was it. I was like a dealer in Vegas. I'm like, it's been a good night. I was out, because I just sat there pouring sweat while she sang, and there was like, and I couldn't, she wouldn't stop. I couldn't interrupt. It was awful, but I'm so happy that you remembered that, because that was the second part of my question.
Oh my God. That is hilarious.
Personal trainers are quite a magnificent.
We're a special breed, man. We're a special breed. I got to tell you, like, and we have met our fair share over the years of fantastic. I mean, just those two were the top right there.
We've met trainers that make me just want to just say that I just want to say I'm a lumberjack when I'm at a cocktail party. What do you do for a living? I'm a lumberjack. I mean, I want to say anything except personal trainer, because as a species, now in all fairness, the science-minded trainer, the mobility-minded trainer, they're growing. Like that generation, the new generation is really coming at it from a more professional science-based perspective. But the older generation of trainers, man, it was just like somebody said to me once, personal training this was a long time ago. Personal training is to the 90s what bartending was to the 80s, meaning it was just that job to get them through on their way to their real career. And that was in a lot of ways the way that it was during the 90s and even in the early 2000s. But fortunately, I think we're seeing a surge in more professional science-based trainers coming up now.
Not only, sir, I think there's another surge that's starting to kind of be, I would say, fertilized right now. A new surge that's evolving even from the mobility guys that are science-based. I think we're starting to, not to get too far off topic, realize how many spokes on the wheel a coach has when it comes to health and well-being.
Totally.
And it's been catapulted by this whole thing. I mean, we've had to reinvent ourselves even in our own business as far as how we communicate to clients, what topics we're talking to our clients about. It's no longer about how well you can do your push-up or anything like that, but it has to do with, are you sleeping properly? What can we do to help support you? How's your mental health sticking up? And it's comforting. I got to tell you that it's moving in that direction, because we've talked about this all. There's something missing from the fitness industry, because it's not all about just exercise and HIIT classes and this and that. We need to have a much broader conversation to get somebody from A to Z when it comes to improving their health. And that is the silver lining that I've kind of taken away from that, is there's another peak happening here. I think the first peak that we saw was in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the mobility movement specialists started coming around. We started paying attention to how people moved and realizing that, hey, maybe I shouldn't be putting 300 pounds on somebody's back and having them do a back squat, and realizing the importance behind that. Now we're starting to realize that, hell, wait a second, it's not just about HIIT now. There are other factors that are involved when it comes to keeping somebody's immune system strong and healthy, and mental state is so fragile. I mean, like, even for my own health, I look forward to the 5-10 minute walk that I go around my block in a whole nother way than I did even 6 months ago. I mean, the priority is high on that now.
I think what we're seeing, just to piggyback on what you're saying, is a real explosion in integrative health coaching, holistic health coaching, functional medicine health coaching. And that brings together exercise and nutrition and gut health and mind-body health and recovery and relaxation and, you know, stress management and sleep and social interaction. And the other thing is that it's also addressing health and wellness issues from a behavior modification perspective. So a lot of the integrative coaches nowadays are really becoming knowledgeable about motivational interviewing and other methods of assisting people in modifying their behavior, because the previous model was the trainer would write out a workout for you and pencil out a diet on a piece of paper that usually consisted of, you know, skinless chicken breast, broccoli, and oxygen, and creatine.
You just described my diet in my early 20s.
Right. Yeah, everybody's diet in their early 20s. And then they're, you know, that used to be kind of the prototypical thing. And now it's expanding greatly to the point where coaches are understanding that it is an integrative model, the spokes on the wheel, where all of these different facets come together. And they not only come together, but a well-educated coach will understand basic behavior change models so that they can help their clients actually not just understand healthy behaviors, but they can assist them in integrating them into their lives.
Right.
Let's do like one more question and then wrap it up. I've got a few. If you've got some, you can ask or I can ask. Well, who was it that went last?
I'm not sure, but I got a quick one for you.
All right.
If you want to answer it quickly.
Yeah.
Have you ever taken a spin class?
Never.
Would you?
No. And I say that with no hesitation whatsoever. And I say that because my wife has tried to get me to take a spin class with her on numerous occasions. And here's really what it breaks down to. I don't have any problem with spin. People love it. And if you love it, then I think that that's what you should do. It sounds horrible to me. I have no interest in doing it. And spinning is to me what grappling would be for my wife. She takes a look at it and she says, no, zero interest in doing it. Even if I sit there and say, but listen, there are all of these benefits from doing jujitsu. She's like, no, you smell, you sweat, and you're rolling around on me. That's 3 strikes, you're out. I'm not doing that. I look at spinning and say, I'm sitting in one place, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm in a strange and not necessarily functionally beneficial body posture for 45 minutes. The answer is no. So for me, it's a no, but I don't condemn it as an exercise modality. I think that people should really do what they love to do. And if you love spinning, then do it, man. There are a lot of benefits to doing spinning. It's just not my cup of tea. So the question is back to you, Garcia. Have you done a spinning class?
No, I have never, ever taken, and listen, there are very few things that I can say that I've never done when it comes to the fitness industry aspect of things. But I think you used the perfect analogy. I feel the same way about spinning, the same way my wife looks at jujitsu. It's just a hell no. Like, I just don't like that thing. Now, one thing that I did try one time that I also thought to myself that I would never take was a Pilates class. And I did a private, and I did it on the Cadillac and everything like that. And Pilates is remarkably hard. I mean, like, it is a phenomenal, I think it's a phenomenal form of exercise. I just don't, it's not my cup of tea.
Right.
Like, I was a one and done for me. It was just like, yeah, that was great. Thank you very much. I'll never do that again. you know, and it's not my modality of training. It's just the same thing that my wife, like she looks at jiu-jitsu and she's like, you'll never get me on the mat. There's no way. There's no
Yeah,
way.
I feel the same way. I mean, that's how I feel about spinning. It's like, hey, I think it's great. I really do. It's not my cup of tea. And I know
Yeah.
that without having to do it. And I would agree that it's very challenging. And I would die in a class the first time I did it.
Oh, for sure.
And so this isn't a matter of me feeling like it doesn't meet my standards, or it has nothing to do with that. It's just not my cup of tea. I don't want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you used the right analogy right there. Because listen, the question has been brought up. We're like, hey, would you take a class with me?
Nope.
Before I was even able to finish the sentence.
Hard pass. Yeah, it's a hard pass. Let me stop you right there. It's like, hey, would you want to do a sput?
Yeah.
They get sput out, and it's like, let me stop you right there. Let me just cut this off. All right, I got one last question for you. And this is health and wellness related, but it's a little bit more on the kind of lifestyle side of things. Morning ritual, kind of along the lines of Miracle Morning, which is a book that you and I both read. And a lot of people endorse having a morning ritual of getting up early, of meditating, of journaling, gratitude practice, of doing some exercise and then reading, and all of that before you start your day. Morning ritual, yes, no, maybe.
That's a yes for me. I think that I value my morning ritual so much that if I don't get to do it, let's say, for whatever reason, I have to wake up early, I wake up purposely 15, 20 minutes earlier so that I make sure on the days that I know is going to be a little bit more hectic and I got to be at the gym or I got to do some errands or something like that. I make sure that ritual is a staple. That's one of those things where it's like, for me personally, it's non-negotiable. Like I have to. It's just so important and so impactful. It's almost like what we were talking about before with the breakfast. It sets the tone for the rest of the day. And I lived my life without a morning ritual long enough to know how important it is when I started injecting it into my daily life. And I think when we read The Morning Miracle, that was one of those books where I was doing versions of something like that, but because of the structure that book gave me, and when I tried it out, I think I did it for, I think it was like I got up to like 50 or 60 days doing that kind of specific scribing and what they detailed in that book. The growth that I had during that time period was huge. It was undeniable. So I've kept versions of that and evolved kind of past that a little bit so that it fits more into my lifestyle and what I do. But I have a morning ritual, and I would have to say that having a morning ritual is probably the first step most people could take, but unfortunately it's usually the last.
Yeah, and in many ways I agree with you. Dawn is saying morning ritual is the best way to start the day. And I generally agree. I'm going to say maybe instead of a hard yes. And the reason I'm going to say that is because I think that that's one of those absolutisms, like saying you should have a morning ritual disallows for bio-individuality, or just individuality in general. Because there are some people who might hear that from an authority figure or an expert, somebody that they respect, and they might implement this this morning ritual practice and not benefit from it, but continue to do it and continue to do it and continue to do it because it's something they should do. I think it has to feel right, and if it feels right, you should do it. And so I do, and I agree with you wholeheartedly on the idea that it sets the context for the day. If you can get up and you can do some journaling, and it can be made up of whatever pieces you want it to be made up of. But if you can do some journaling or practice gratitude, do some mindfulness or some meditation or some sort of relaxation to really set the stage for how you're going to enter the world that day. A little bit of mobility. I don't necessarily feel like I need to bang out a 45-minute HIIT workout, in the early morning, but doing just 5 minutes of mobility, I think that it can often go a long way towards setting the context for the day exactly the way that you're saying. I have also noticed, however, that there are times when I'm forcing it, where I'm forcing myself to go through the motions, and then it becomes mechanical and it becomes robotic, and then it becomes just another 4 or 5 items on my to-do list that day that I resent having to do. And that's when I know I got to take a break for a couple days and feel my way back into it, feel my way back into it.
That's funny that you say that, because I've recently put in certain kind of daily practices that have turned into that. So it's a really relevant kind of thing to say. I think it's important to define what you mean by morning rituals, right? For me, when I was going through the Miracle Morning stuff, it was too much. It was too much. It was great.
There are like 5 or 6 things, right?
There's 5 or 6 things, and I think, and that's where I go back and I say it's evolved for me, because I had to fit it into my daily routines for what works for me. And I think that the most important thing for daily routine is not necessarily going, I'm going to do gratitude, or I'm going to do exercise, or I'm going to journal, but being able to fluctuate between 3 or 4 different things and just do what you feel is appropriate for that day.
What you feel connected to that day.
What you feel connected to. It might be exercise on Monday. It might be journaling on the next day. It might be different. So being able to just have 4 or 5 things that you can kind of fluctuate behind, so that, because in the absence of those 5 things that are healthy, right? You know what happens? I wake up in the morning and I go right to this.
Yeah.
And if this becomes my ritual in the morning, then I start to create unhealthy habits from this, and my tone of the day is ruined. So if my first action is to go to the first news report that pops up in notification, or emails that I need to answer, or social media, what's my next TikTok that I'm going to do, whatever it is, it sets a negative tone for me.
I agree.
And that's where having a morning ritual is such a hard yes for me. But like you said, it can't be a hard line. This is what you got to do first thing when you wake up in the morning. There's got to be some autonomy there. There's got to be autonomy.
I totally agree. And when I go to my phone first, I'm a squirrel for the rest of the day.
Oh,
that's my problem. If I start with the phone, which just promotes a lack of attention, it just promotes attention deficit. If I start the day with my phone, then I am a squirrel all day long. I suffer from shiny object syndrome all day when I'm like, I'm here, I'm there, I'm that squirrel, I'm over there, I'm going over here. It's terrible. But I like the idea of having a portfolio of available behaviors and activities in the morning that you can choose off the menu what feels right today, because you don't always want to eat the same meal. So you're not always going to want to participate in the same activities every morning as well. And I like that context and that concept. But I agree with you, excuse me, if I start the day with taking a walk. So here are some of my go-tos that I'll shuffle through and I'll kind of pick and choose from. A morning walk, my God, one of my favorite things. It's just one of my favorite things. Just to walk around the block outside, I love it. About 5 minutes of mobility, journaling. And when I journal, I'm going stream of consciousness. I'm not editing, I'm not judging, I'm not thinking, I'm just puking essentially. I'm vomiting onto the page, whatever's coming out of my head, because a lot of the times those might be anxieties or things that I'm preoccupied with that built up over the night. And I need to get those out of the way so that I can focus on the things that matter. 5 minutes of, even just 5 minutes of mindfulness breathing or some sort of meditation. Gratitude I will do, but what I did find is that when I try to do gratitude every single day, I'm not connected with it. Like I'll be trying to force it. You know, I know what I should be saying. I should be saying that I'm grateful for X, Y, and Z, but I got to tell you, right now I'm not feeling that. So I'm not going to try to force it, you know? So those are kind of my go-to things, would be like taking a walk, mobility, journaling, mindfulness, meditation, maybe some gratitude. Those are really kind of my go-to items.
Do you find, and I bring this up only because one of my favorite things to do is to go in the morning and have a cup of coffee in the backyard and just listen to the birds, really. There's nothing better. But do you find that your daily ritual, and this is why autonomy I think is so important, it changes Monday through Friday versus on a Sunday, or like your weekend and stuff like that. And that's another reason to just be able to have 3 or 5 things ready at the go, because I think it just changes. I mean, I like doing that on a Sunday morning, whereas Monday morning, I don't want to do that. I want to do something else. Like
me too.
You know,
I think part of it for me is that I have very little anxiety in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays. And I know that it's the weekend and I can get up and I can sit outside and I can drink my coffee. And it is one of my favorite things to do, to just sit in the backyard. Right now, it feels like there are more birds around, there are more butterflies, there are more bees, and I just sit there and enjoy my yard. It's more difficult, and this is a me problem. It's more difficult for me to do Monday through Friday because I have this anxiety of, you got to start the day, dude. You got to start going. You've got this laundry list of things to do, man. And that's always tickling. That right there is what infects and impacts the regularity and consistency of my morning rituals, is the anxiety of feeling like I need to start the day. And I think in large part that might be because you and I operate in an industry where we start our days at 6 o'clock in the morning often, or before. I mean, I'm not talking get up. We're working at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I wonder if we had been in a different occupation where we had more of a 9 to 5 schedule, if it would be easier for us to get up at 7 o'clock, spend an hour doing our rituals, and then ease into the day at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, as opposed to the occupation that we have where you got to jump out of bed at 4:45 or 5 o'clock. You got to boom, 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 and you are on stage. Yeah, right. You're on stage. You sit straight up. And by 6 o'clock, you're on stage because you're in front of people, and you can't crawl in like a zombie. You have to be awake and prepared to bring some intention and energy to what you're doing. I wonder if, almost 30 years, 25 years of doing that is part of the reason why it's more difficult for me Monday through Friday to relax into and really feel the benefits of my morning ritual sometimes. That's probably why I kind of toggle on and off with my morning rituals.
I would have to say yes for me personally. And listen, what I've done recently is on those days where I like Monday, Wednesday, Friday are kind of my days for that right now. It's changed a little bit. I do my brain dumps. I brain dump on those days. That's my morning ritual, where it's just like, everything, and then I go have my breakfast and get ready, and then I get into my work. Coincidentally enough, that brain dump becomes my to-do list for that day, and I feel better, and I'm able to slow down, drink my coffee, have my breakfast, and then get into my work. And I find that my work is more productive because of that.
That makes sense. It makes sense to me that purging all of those things that are rattling around in your head first thing in the morning with the brain dump would kind of create some space to relax and kind of ease into the day. Stacy's saying kids are a factor. Kids are a factor in how you are able to manage your morning rituals, and that can be Monday through Sunday. And so I don't have that. That is not a factor for me because we don't have kids. And so for me, that whole angle has to complicate things or to present other challenges to managing a consistent morning ritual.
Right. Hold on, wait a second. My Beats just said no
That's all right. It has been an hour anyway.
It basically cut me off. Said, hey,
Yeah, and it's like, you've said,
enough.
they said very little of what you've said up until this point has been important, but anything that takes place after this is going to be completely worthless. So let's cut it off. All right, man. So let's wrap it up. Good to talk to you. I'll see you again I'll see you before then, but we'll do this again next week. Bring some good topics. We'll continue with the yes, no, maybe. If anybody who's watching has any ideas that you'd like Joe and I to weigh in on, different concepts, different topics from the field of health and wellness that you'd like to hear our perspective, our yes, no, maybe on, just put them in the comments section and we'll weigh in on those next time.
Cool.
All right. I'll talk to you later, man.
Happy Thursday.